Hello and welcome to another episode of Vagabond VC. Today's episode is from Colombia. I'm interviewing Damián Alcedo. He is the Senior Director at Polymath Ventures. Polymath is a startup studio based out of Bogota. We conducted this interview over Zoom because I was in Medellin at the time. Polymath has a pretty interesting process as they work from their idea creation all the way to recruiting founders and building a startup. Damián will walk us through their process and how they go about basically starting a venture from scratch. So without any further delay, let's jump in. All right, everyone. Excited to have Damián Alcedo join the podcast today. He is the Senior Director of Polymath Ventures, a startup studio based out of Bogota. Damián is normally based around Mexico City, but he is in Bogota today, and we are doing this meeting by Zoom. Damián, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here with you.
Thanks. I am excited to have you. So normally when I kick these things off, I like to start off with my guest and talk about you personally. So I would like to know, what is your background and how you got involved in the startup ecosystem and your path to your current role with Polymath?
Perfect. So just to go back a little bit, I'm half Spanish, I'm half Dutch, and originally I studied a master's in urbanism and architecture. Worked in that for a while, and then after a while, I wanted to do an MBA and see what was possible outside of this sector. So I did my MBA, worked in more commercial areas for a while, and then I went to Mexico already more than 7 years ago, where together with Rocket Internet, I launched CarMatch. CarMatch was a direct sales car platform where we would buy cars from individuals. Basically, you could, go on the website, put in the data of your car, you would get a quote. And if you like that, you could come to our inspection center, we would review the car and the documents. And if everything was fine, we would buy it on the spot. And then we had an auction system where the next day we would auction the cars to professional buyers. And I started CarMatch in Mexico. We grew that. We raised funding, seed round, Series A round, and then at some point, after 4 years more or less, we sold the company in an asset deal. And right around that time, I got in touch with Polymath Ventures. I met multiple people at Polymath Ventures, and I really liked, what they were doing, the mission they had, the quality of the people, and that's why almost 3 years ago, I decided to join Polymath Ventures. And in my current role at Polymath Ventures, I help and lead the new startups we launch. And there I'm specifically focused on growth and helping these companies gain traction.
So previous founder, previous fundraising experience, previous successful exit. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And now in a role where you're helping support new founders grow businesses. And Polymath is a pretty unique setup because I'm not sure if everyone knows exactly what a startup studio model is compared to, say, like an incubator and accelerator. So let's talk through Polymath and how it differs from, say, another startup platform and what the process is for growing startups there.
So I think that the main difference is, as a startup studio, we build companies from scratch, which I think is quite different from what incubators do, for example, or what VCs do. So we actually create the ideas, then we validate those ideas, and then based on that, we build companies, right? And then as Polymath, we're specifically focused on building digital platforms that help empower the emerging middle class in Latin America. So that's the core of what we're doing. And then if you look, how do we do this? Or it's 4 phases basically to build a company. So the first phase is the ideation phase, where we start researching different verticals to understand what people are experiencing in those verticals and where there could be unmet needs. So we do a lot of research. Based on this research, we do synthesis from which we get to some conclusions. And then based on those insights, we start creating concepts. And we build a lot of concepts. We analyze those concepts. We pick the most promising ones. And for those most promising concepts, we build prototypes. And we start with defining, okay, for which of these prototypes do we actually want to do an MVP? I think that's the ideation phase, right? And that phase can take around 3 to 6 months of time to run that whole process, including the next phase, which is validation, where we actually launch one MVP, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, we will go back and either recalibrate the MVP or launch a different MVP. And if the MVP launch, then we'll do a soft launch in the company to actually get like the first tractions to see if there's really potential there, right? If that works out, then the next stage is, okay, now we need to get to product market fit, which can take up to almost 10 to 12 months, where we iterate constantly on our value proposition, on our product to get to product market fit. And I think this is a stage where speed is super important because, we don't have a lot of time to do this. So we need to test things very fast, get learnings, and implement those learnings in the next test. And once we get to PMF, after that, we get into the acceleration phase where the focus is much more on growth and execution. And I think, within this process, that there are a couple of principles that are super important for us. And I think I've already touched a bit on them. First of all, when we start with the ideation phase, I think what we're trying to get is a really deep understanding of certain segments. So we're not trying to replicate models that we've seen somewhere else. We're not trying to follow trends. We're really trying to understand the segment and solve deeply unmet needs within that segment, right? Then the next phase in product market fit, here, literally, it's all about product market fit and how can we get to a point where we have something that really meets the need we just mentioned. That's at least 10x better as what's currently in the market to meet that need, and have something on which we can build a scalable business. And then in order to build that scalable business, like I mentioned earlier, we need to move fast and we need to attract the correct talent, right? And I think we spend quite a lot of time on the acquisition of talent, one, and second, then on coaching and training that talent so that they can reach their full potential and help us so that the companies can also reach their full potential.
So I have two questions there, one on the ideas themselves in that process and two on the talent that you just mentioned. So we'll start with that first one. When in the idea phase and looking at these different verticals and these unmet needs, do you typically go after just one? Or if you have several verticals that might have unmet needs, would you then create maybe two ideas for two different companies at the same time that run parallel to each other? Or is it just, let's just focus on one company building one idea and then we'll move on to another one?
No, so I think we go into a vertical and like we do the research and the synthesis, and then when we get to concepting, we build a lot of concepts, right? And most of them are discarded, but so we work on multiple concepts within one vertical at the same time, but usually we only pick one to move ahead or to take really to the end, right? And there could be other interesting concepts that we didn't use, and that's something that we're actually looking into if it's worth going back to them as well. But we work on multiple concepts. We do multiple prototypes, but once we move to the MVP definition, we ideally want to go ahead with one, which is not always possible, and we might have to go back. But the idea is to go ahead, like from MVP onwards, especially PMF, just with one concept.
Understood. And on the second piece, when it comes to recruiting talent to execute on these ideas, so the venture studio model, or at least Polymath's model, where does the CEO position, or I guess the leadership position for driving the idea forward and actually building the company come in? Where does that person come in, and where do they start getting involved in the process?
So it's been different with the different companies we've launched. So there's not one specific way we've done that. However, I think we've realized that the earlier we can bring somebody on, the better, because that way they have the deepest understanding of what we're doing and they can take that forward. So ideally, someone will come on at the start of the ideation phase or somewhere within the ideation phase. I think whatever happens, somebody should join before the PMF phase, because in the PMF phase, we're really launching the company. And by that time, we should have the CEO. So there's some wiggle room, I would say, of when we can bring it on. But I think experience learns that the earlier you bring it on, the better.
And what are some of the qualities that you would look for in an individual that would then take on this idea and grow the company? Because this might not, if this idea is kind of incubated in a group setting, it's not a situation where you have a founder who basically saw a market problem and went to solve themselves, right? They're kind of coming into this process. So does that mean you would want someone with prior domain experience or with prior founding experience? What are some of the qualities that you would look for in someone that would actually take this and then execute and grow the company?
So I think when we look at the talent we bring for these positions, I think that there are some skills that we feel are learnable, but that there needs to be some foundation there, right? So I think they need to have structured thinking, needs to be good. They need to understand our methodologies, or at least to a level where it's easy for us to help them really master those methodologies. I think for founders, it's super important that they're great communicators because they need to sell this to their team, to customers, to investors. So I think that's important. Obviously, leadership is very important as they're going to lead these teams. And I think a last point on the learnable skills that we think is important is decision making, right? Are they good at prioritization? Can they take decisions with the right speed? And I think those are skills that we look for, where we feel that they need to be good at most of these skills and cannot be bad at any of these skills. And then there's a set of skills that we think are not learnable. And for us, those skills people need to have, but those are more traits of the person than really skills, right? So it's about, are they aligned with our values? Do they have personal maturity? Do they have grit? And are they competitive? Do they have entrepreneurial instincts? Those are things we think, if you don't have them, it's unlikely that we will be able to teach you them or to get you to a point where you have that. So those for us, like, you need to have them no matter what.
Gotcha. And this whole process you mentioned can take on, the high end up to 18 months, right? And obviously that varies on the different companies that you're building. But one thing is for sure is that this is a very collaborative process as you are going from studying these verticals, doing these concepts, coming up with product market fit. And with that collaboration, obviously the last year and a half, almost 2 years now with COVID, it's kind of disrupted everyone's business models and how they go about doing things. When I actually first came to Polymath in January of 2020, prior to the pandemic, one of the things I noticed right off the bat, and this was actually in your old headquarters before moving to a new one, but was just how closely everyone was working together. All these teams were sitting there with each other and really collaborating on these different ideas. And I picked up on that environment. How did that change during the pandemic? How did it disrupt maybe some of the processes you were working on? And are there any after effects from that changed the way that you guys are doing business?
So I think that there's a couple of things here to unpack. I think, first of all, the pandemic has reinforced the purpose that we have, which is building to enable the middle class. Because of the pandemic, more than 5 million people in Latin America have fallen out of that middle class into lower classes. So this has only made us believe stronger in the purpose that we have, and has reinforced our commitment to that. I think if you look at the process, I think like everybody else, our process has moved fully online for quite some time. And I think we found the digital tools to do that. And we were able to also move our culture to embrace this and work efficiently. But I think, the clue actually lies in the word efficient, right? Because I think for what we do, efficiency is actually not the most important thing. I think if you look at startups in a later stage where a lot of people are executing playbooks where it's about execution and growth, then efficiency is super important. But actually what we realized that in our process, where it's about ideation, about validation, but like these are very difficult processes where you need to have really deep conversations and deep discussions to be able to solve them. And we noticed that it's much more difficult to have those kinds of interactions and discussions online where people are just like hopping from one Zoom meeting to the next. So actually what we did is we reaccommodated we moved to a new headquarters, and we made sure that everything in the headquarters is built in a way that people can work in a safe environment, even during the pandemic or the aftermath of the pandemic. And we're moving back to a much more in-office experience because we really believe that helps us solve these problems.
No, great. That's great to hear. So Polymath has been operating for how long now? How many years?
Polymath has been operating for almost 9 years now.
For 9 years. And in that time, you have how many current portfolio companies?
We currently have 6 portfolio companies. We expect to launch between 2 and 3 more companies next year.
Great. Are there any recent wins or highlights for some of these companies that you want to address?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of them, right? First of all, I think, and this is something that happened during the pandemic, but I think when you last spoke to Maria Paula, we, as Polymath, all the ventures we were launching completely by ourselves. During the pandemic, we launched Polymath Plus, which is our business unit for co-building, where we co-build ventures with like-minded corporations. So this is something that has gone very well for us. And actually, during the last year, we launched two new companies out of Polymath Plus. The first one is Robstar, which is a second-hand fashion marketplace empowering curators in Latin America. And this one we built together with Vertical Partners, an early-stage VC firm powered by Leonisa's corporate group here in Colombia. And the second company we launched during this year is Tani, which we did in a partnership with Infoca, a leading Peruvian investment firm. And Tani is a medical procedures platform focused on providing quality care and transparent prices for the middle class in Latin America. So I think besides the launch of Polymath Plus, these are two big wins for us as well. And I think besides that, since the start of the pandemic, both Autolab, auto repair and parts platform, as well as Elena's, our social commerce, raised important rounds, and both of them expanded from Colombia to Mexico and are seeing significant growth in Mexico. So I think, there's been quite a few wins for us in the last year.
Yeah, actually, this is the first I've heard of Polymath Plus. That's a really interesting development. And so I'm understanding correctly. So you partner with these corporations to help kind of co-invent these ideas. Do they get involved as early on as like the idea phase, or when do these corporations come in and help develop?
Yes, so they come in really at the start of the project. So usually the scope of the project is defined together with these corporations, because that allows us also to leverage the knowledge and industry insights these corporations already have in certain verticals.
So zooming out a bit more outside of Polymath and more to the actual ecosystem in Colombia, and then also just in the broader Latin ecosystem, what are some of the challenges and opportunities that are currently in place in the ecosystem, the local ecosystem, for entrepreneurship and venture funding?
I think if we look first at the challenges, I think the first one is political instability or political stability, whichever way you want to look at it. If you look in 2021, 9 countries had political elections, 5 of them actually presidential elections. In 2022, Colombia will hold presidential elections. Mexico's president still has almost 3 years to go, but is already starting to heat up the election debate. So there's a certain political instability in the region that I think is a challenge for the ecosystem. I think second is still the impact of COVID and potential new waves, right? I think if you look right now, you see numbers slightly going up again in Europe. And that trend is probably going to follow in Latam, but in Latam, the vaccination rate is still much lower. So I think it's still everybody is trying to keep an eye out on if there are going to be potential restrictions again or not during the next 6 to 12 months. So I think that's also still something that's a challenge for the ecosystem. I think a third one, which is more specific to the ecosystem, is that even though the VC ecosystem has been growing in Latam, at a local level, there's still not as many VCs as in other regions. So that means that access to at least local capital and that local knowledge that goes with that is not on par with other regions. Yeah, and I think for me, those are the 3 biggest challenges right now for the ecosystem. I think if you look at opportunities and continuing on this last point, even though the local ecosystem is still not on par with other regions, I think the interest from international VCs has grown quite a lot in the last years. So in general, the access to funding has grown also a lot. I think that's a trend that's going to continue. I think the second one, and that's also in large part due to COVID, is the increased adoption of digital tools by users in areas like e-commerce, education, healthcare. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in those segments. And I think third, and I think that's like a culmination of a couple of things coming together, including more funding coming into the region, more awareness of that, I think there's also more willingness from international and national talent to join startups in LATAM. So I think that's also a great opportunity for startups in the region.
And you already mentioned, obviously, right there, some of the upcoming sectors that you think are going to be big, such as education, healthcare. Where do you think the startup ecosystem overall is going to head in the next 5 years? Obviously, you mentioned some capitals pouring in, some multinationals getting more involved. So if you could kind of pull out a crystal ball and maybe place yourself 5 years from now, where do you see the ecosystem then?
No, I definitely think we're going to see a lot of activities in these sectors. I mentioned e-commerce, health tech, and ad tech. I think on top of that, fintech is obviously one of the sectors that's moving fastest in Latin America. And I also think prop tech is trailing right behind that. So I think those sectors will continue to grow. I also think that the amount of funding we're seeing flowing in right now, I think it's going to continue at that level. I don't think it's a bubble. I think that's the new normal in Latin America. And I think as a result of a maturing ecosystems, we're going to see more IPOs in the region and also more companies that are truly regional at the Latin American level.
Great. And more specific to Polymath, you mentioned some of the initiatives you've had in the last year or so with Polymath Plus, and then some of the successes of your portfolio companies, such as Elena's. Where do you see Polymath in 5 years in terms of maybe some of the trends you guys are tackling and, some of the portfolio companies? Where's the company going to be 5 years from now?
So I think, first of all, we're going to definitely focus on the sectors I just mentioned and launch companies in these sectors. I think in the next 5 years, we should launch at least 10 companies between the regular companies we launched at Polymath and the company that we launched from Polymath Plus. I think for us, it's going to be super important to consolidate our presence both in Colombia and in Mexico. I think, as a matter of fact, our presence right now in Colombia is already quite strong, and we want to expand that more to Mexico. And like I said, Elena's is already operating in Mexico. Autolab is operating in Mexico. Tani was actually launched from Mexico. So we're very much focused on expanding our presence there. I think from a talent perspective and from a fundraising perspective, we will be opening new offices both in Europe and in the US. In Europe, that's going to be in Spain, and in the US, we'll still have to see. But I think the Spain office is going to be very useful for us to be able to acquire more international talent, more European talent. And I think that the US office will bring us closer to the global VC system, especially the US VC system. And I think a last point that we want to see in the next couple of years is also exits of at least 2 to 3 companies. And I think given the way the companies are progressing right now, we're in a very good position to realize that.
That's really impressive. And also, especially with the expansion to Europe and the US, right? The objective there is to get more international talent, but also international investors and attention. Is that right?
Yes, correct. But the focus of building the companies is still going to be on Latin America, right? So that's something that's not going to change. But I think, for example, if you look at the talent side, we already have a lot of international talent. But part of this talent, and definitely not all, they like to come to Latin America. They see it as an adventure, but at some point they want to move back either to the US or to Europe. So then having offices in those locations will allow us to retain that talent, for example.
Yeah, no, great strategy. So if individuals want to get in touch with you regarding Polymath and maybe some of the venture companies and what you guys are working on, what would be a good way for people to reach you?
I think that the easiest way is to look at our website, and people can reach us on the contact information that's right there. We're also active on Instagram, on Twitter, very much active on LinkedIn. So I think there's a lot of ways people can find us and get in touch with us. And if people want to reach out to me, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to interact.
Great. I will add all that information into the show notes. Damián, I really appreciate your time today. This has been really exciting to learn more about Polymath and some of the new initiatives that you guys have going on, and also to see the success of some of the portfolio companies you've already been working on. So I'd like to thank you once again for your time. And anyone, if you are interested in learning about Polymath, please go to their website.
No, and thanks so much for having me. It was super interesting catching up with you again. And yeah, like you said, anybody interested in Polymath, please look at our website or our LinkedIn profile or shoot me a message on LinkedIn.
Great. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks.